Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the UCSF Last Lecture 2021. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. The Last Lecture series was made famous by Dr. Randy Pausch, a Carnegie Mellon professor whose lecture actually became his last lecture, having been recently diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. In spring of 2012, the inaugural UCSF Last Lecture received a warm and welcoming response. This year, the student-initiated event will continue to build on that tradition. Today's lecture will bring out stories intertwining various dimensions of the nominated faculty members' trajectory, encompassing the professional, personal, spiritual, and cultural experiences that have brought them to where they are today. We began the process of tonight's last lecture early last year, when we asked the student governments from each school to put together our nominee list. From this list, hundreds of students from all of our UCSF programs voted. While the 2020 Last Lecture event was canceled due to the pandemic, we are happy to honor last year's winning nominee tonight, Dr. Peter Chin Hong.
Born on the Caribbean island of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Chin Hong earned his undergraduate and medical degrees from Brown University before completing an internal medicine residency and infectious diseases fellowship at UCSF. Currently, Dr. Chin Hong is Associate Dean of Regional Campuses. He specializes in treating infectious diseases, particularly infections that develop in people who have suppressed immune systems, such as transplant recipients, including transplant recipients who have HIV. During the coronavirus pandemic, he played an active role in educating the general public about the virus. Additionally, over the years, Dr. Chin Hong has received numerous teaching awards. He was the inaugural holder of the Academy Endowed Chair for Innovation in Teaching. He is a member of the UCSF Academy of Medical Educators and is course director for the Pathogen and Host Defense course in the School of Medicine. He is passionate about social justice, workforce development, pipeline programs, and mentoring across differences. And so, on behalf of the UCSF student body, I asked Dr. Chin Hong, if you have but one lecture to give, what would you say?
We just want for dance.
Well, thank you so much, students, for this great honor. I love you guys even more than my COVID plushie. A last lecture, wow. One opportunity to dispense the wisdom from my life to you, the students. You guys have been my blood, my beef, my lifeline for these past few years. We've learned microbiology together, infectious disease together. We saw patients together. We laughed, we sang, we danced. We shared meals. You cooked for me. I gave you food. You laughed at my inane mnemonics. You even laughed at my dad jokes, and no one laughed at my dad jokes. But we shared deep sorrows, and we bawled together. And during this past year of COVID suffering and darkness, we drew strength from each other. You and your extra time deftly organized community mass drives. We worked together on structural racism, Asian hate, prison health as community health. But when I think about how to make the most of your life about hearing about mine, the answer is, I can't give you all the answers, but I can tell you stories. And boy, could I tell you stories. So where does one begin? At the end? At the beginning? My countryman from Trinidad, V.S. Naipaul, said, "Life doesn't have a neat beginning and a tidy end. Life is always going on. You should begin in the middle and end in the middle, and it should all be there." But my beginning is really hard to pinpoint. I have no creation story for my family, especially since my family spanned different centuries, continents, colonial rulers. They travel on planes, trains, automobiles, on foot, before settling in Trinidad, the most southerly of the Caribbean necklace of islands, right off the coast of Venezuela and South America. So to my ancestors who shaped me, made me a lover of roti, of chow mein, of curry, milk tea, boba, dance, and music, all kinds of music, I will start at the beginning with the woman who gave me birth, my mother.
你乖乖瞓落床，聽朝阿媽要趕插秧咯，阿 夜太熬，去上山崗。
So I'm from Fifth Company Village in Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad is called the land of the hummingbirds. I'm the Caribbean son of one of the most Chinese women around. That's the thing about what being Caribbean or being West Indian is. There's no definition. There's no Oxford Dictionary entry. Only a feeling. My first memory of my mother was movement. She was rushing there, she's rushing there to get goods for customers who would come to the front of the shop. We had the shop. They would come to the counter, and she was just like this dynamo. She wasn't like an Energizer bunny. That's too much staccato-ness and too mechanical. She's more like the hummingbirds I saw flitting around botanical gardens when I went to Port of Spain, the capital, or when I went to visit my best friend Colin in Point Fortin in his manicured lawns where he had bougainvillea and hibiscus, and where his Mexican-born mother, Dora, tended lovingly over her canias and heliconias. But I don't remember hummingbirds in the poor south where I was from. We lived in the deep south, really rural area in Trinidad. The bush, that's what Trinidadians told me. And we lived in a village called Fifth Company Village, which was founded by formerly enslaved Africans who fought for the British as colonial marines in 1812, in that 1812 war. I'm the middle child of three, and we lived on Moruga Road, to be precise. There were no hummingbirds in Moruga Road. There were more crows and kobo, as they say in Trinidad. We never learned to swim, my brother and I. We didn't have Mai Tais. There were no pina coladas sold anywhere. Nobody had a pool. Nobody even had a pool table. Tanning wasn't a thing. In fact, people tried to escape the oppressiveness and the heat of the sun. And whenever I'd go to the lush north to visit Maracas Beach, which is super rare, we'd always cackle about the tourists baking in the sun as if it was something that you aspired to, when all of us shared away from it. So in childhood, my village, Fifth Company Village, was this hard-scrabble settlement. In addition to descendants of freed slaves from the American South, there were indentured cane farmers from India who were brought in to work on the cane fields. And then there was us, my mom, my dad, who grew up in and met in Guangdong, China, but then they came to Trinidad, and they represented the Chinese migration stream that escaped the poverty of southern China at the time, and who escaped to far-off lands all over the world, and that is the Chinese diaspora. For many of us, food is culture, food is heritage, food is part of our souls. But as a little kid, all I knew is that when I made pronouncements about what I wanted for dinner, it seemed to magically appear, even if I changed my mind like a million times. I would get noodle soup, Chinese egg souffle, chow mein, fried chicken, roast pork, fried wontons. My mom was a culinary wizard. What an incredible feat. It was incredible because the demands of the family business was so all-encompassing. She was at once Chief Innovation Officer, Chief Financial Officer, customer-facing worker, cook, nurse, custodian, cheerleader, mom. She took care of everything. She took charge of everything. There's a saying, woman hold up half the sky. That was her. But sometimes, though, I wish the hummingbird would slow down to hear school stress that I had, to kind of decompress my adolescent angst. I guess I had my lower metabolism father to easily fill that void. And with him, I would download and purge my anxieties on these trips to Port of Spain, the capital, when I accompanied him, when he went to visit wholesale vendors to get goods for the shop. The only time the hummingbird, my mom, slowed down was when my brother Patrick or myself got sick. And all I remember were these dark village nights where fireflies provided the only light in a zigzag fashion. As I peered through these louvered windows that we had, crickets chirping in the background, and she would sleep next to us, interrupting the coughing or wheezing we had by singing lullabies from enchanted far-off lands of her youth. These were lullabies in a dialect I didn't even understand, but I remember being mesmerized by these medleys. I memorized this music by heart because I hummed it to myself when I needed comfort, when my mom was busy in the shop. On those precious rare nights, I began to see my mother more clearly. She was less of a blur of motion like a hummingbird. And I began to realize that there was a deep textured history that she brought to the islands long before my brother and myself were born. I would say something like, "Mommy, tell me more about how you got to 5th Company Village." She wouldn't say much. She would say something like, "It was hard in China, so I took your sister to Hong Kong. We waited for your dad to get enough money to bring us to Trinidad." The 7-year-old me would say back, "Tell me more." And my mom would say something like, "Boy, you so fast, yes? Maybe when you get bigger." So over time, I learned that my father had to abruptly leave China when my grandfather in Trinidad died suddenly, and he was summoned to take over the shop. My mother and big sister, Jean, were left behind in post-Japanese occupation and Civil War China. I'm still only now coming to terms with what that meant. We say economic upheaval after war, but they suffered through hunger, and they foraged roots because they were so hungry, sadness, loneliness, and facing an increasingly bleak landscape. My mom and my sister joined the massive but perilous migration to British-controlled Hong Kong. So on a rickety boat on the South China Sea, my mother gave another woman to hold my sister as her own daughter to increase the chances that one of them would make it to Hong Kong. Fortunately, they both made it. But they waited, and they waited, and they waited. So more than a decade elapsed, and eventually my father was able to save up from the struggling business in the village to send for them. And that was more than 10 years. So all these years, my mom had to raise my sister on her own with little money to come from the struggling shop in Trinidad. And when she got here, 5th Company Village, Moruga Road, was as far away as you can get from Hong Kong. Hong Kong was one of the 4 Asian tigers. They were economic giants. They were ruling the world in business. And instead of a buzzing, increasingly sophisticated metropolis of skyscrapers, she met a dilapidated 100-year-old shop with a galvanized roof that was rusty and leaky, and no match for the cats and dogs tropical rain during rainy season. I remember that our storage room for the shop flooded often during rains, and I spent my childhood gleefully making paper boats, setting them sail on this water that looked like tea, hoping that no encounter would be made with an errant snake or a scorpion or a centipede, startled as they sought higher and drier ground. But the shop wasn't the only thing that was bad. She left 24-hour cha-chan tangs, which are Hong Kong-style cafes, serving toothsome char siu and noodles and pineapple buns and milky tea, to find that there was no bakery for miles. Forget about cafes and forget about Starbucks. City lights of Hong Kong were replaced by the errant zigzag of fireflies. And the sounds of Kowloon rush hour, and it was always rush hour in Kowloon and Hong Kong, was substituted by an army of frogs that descended on our concrete stoop for choir practice at night, using the drip-drop of leaky rainwater from our tank as musical accompaniment. And then there were the villagers. Perhaps the biggest adjustment my mom had to make was with the villagers. When they came to buy sweet brown sugar, flour, rice, sugar, toothpaste, what have you, they were this amazing group of people. There was this lively carnival of wizened, cutlass-wielding cane farmers, sari-clad spouses, Afro-Caribbean women in colorful headdresses, the village Bajan like Big Joe, the Baptists, the Catholics, the Anglicans, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Adventists, these school children who are all in uniforms. So many of them, all shapes and sizes, of half-caste, the bastard kids, the smart ones, the good-for-nothing ones trying to pull a fast one. One of them would say, "Miss Sue, I want a penny cool and a red mango." And she would say something like, "Okay, boy, study hard, here's your change." And he'd say something like, "But I give you $20, not $1 for change." And she'd tell him, "Boy, you better run home fast before I hit you so hard you land in China by my family." And he would run away. The villagers viewed my mom with suspicion, and the feeling was mutual. She served it right back at them. If my father was the unofficial mayor, making bawdy jokes, liming, old talking with the old folks, giving out freebies when they couldn't afford it, my mom was a cross between an accountant and a policewoman, except she was much, much faster, and she didn't like donuts. Actually, you couldn't get donuts anywhere anyway. So as a child, I watched her intently as a hummingbird bobbed and buzzed and fussed. Because part of that exploration and fuller appreciation of myself was understanding who my family was, and specifically who my mom, the hummingbird, was. Because history matters. Remember that quote I told you about, "Women hold up half the sky"? It sounds so lovely and inspiring. But exactly what makes it effective propaganda and why it was part of Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward is that women were called to work in the fields, but they were still expected to do work at home. So in life, we should always appreciate history. We should always appreciate the fullness, the whole context of phrases, of statements, of people. Only then we can get full meaning and anticipate any consequences. I needed to catch my hummingbird of a mother when she was slowed down enough to appreciate more of the beauty of her life, of my life, because that had future implications for the roles that I would play, for the jobs that I would take later on. And while it has taken me decades to understand my mom, and I'm discovering things all of the time, even now, I vividly remember the day my relationship with my grandmother was transformed forever. I was 7. It was hot and humid. It was always hot and humid anyway. It was a Saturday morning, and I had run inside to stealthily take a break from helping out my parents in the front of the shop. I was pretty surly as I was missing out on Saturday morning cartoons, and especially Big Blue Marble, one of the many US TV imports we got in Trinidad at the time. And in Big Blue Marble, there were kids all over the world being creative, having fun, hang gliding, making art. It seemed that everyone was having fun except for me. So it was a buzzing and especially busy day in the shop. And boy, was it unforgivingly hot. The cane farmers had gotten pay at the end of crop season, and the families came in a rush to buy extras that they had foregone over the year that they weren't being paid. So they were buying things like bejeweled ribbons and crepe soles for the kids, maybe a headlamp for hunting, new linoleum for the table. I daringly turned on the TV, waiting for the inevitable parental shouts to come help. "Peter, you better come here before you know what will happen." Then I heard the screams coming from the customers in the shop. I raced to the counter and saw the villagers pointing to a bushy trellis in the neighbor's house. "Snake, snake! What that boy? Where that boy? Across the road in Eugene Gallery. Monday, that snake big, yes? It looked like a mappy. How we gonna kill that thing? You can't cutlass that thing down. Somebody go get Sting. Only one way. Call Miss Ivy to shoot it down." Miss Ivy was my grandmother, and she usually sat perched next to the cash register, making sure that everybody got the right change, but mainly making sure that no employee would slip an extra $1 or $2 in their bosoms. She left her post, she ran inside, she retrieved a hunting rifle, She rushed across the road, not wasting any time, took aim confidently, and pow! By the time I saw the snake, it was reduced to a pile of eviscerated, motionless flesh on asphalt. There were flies that already started buzzing around, and these bare-chested men with the snake, or the remains of a snake, and an old potato sack. They disinfected the surrounding areas with this pink, strong-smelling substance that I'm sure is banned by the US EPA. And then Granny, well, she quietly resumed her position as guardian of the shop's finances. So right in front of my eyes, Granny transformed from Mrs. Doubtfire into this venomous snake assassin. But there was no victory parade or hoisting Granny on shoulders, confetti or ticker parade. Just a quiet respect and a matter of fact, I told you she could do it. As if she always did it. And I was the last person in the village to know. Because I guess she always did it. And I guess I was the last person in the village to know. Let me tell you a little bit more about Granny. Granny was half Indian and half Scottish. Her father was the Scottish overseer of one of the cocoa plantations at the turn of the century in Trinidad. Her mother was one of the East Indian laborers there, a rare woman in a sea of East Indian indentured servants who were men mainly, and there was certainly a power dynamic between them. I remember or guess that the aftermath of that union was filled with a lot of unsaids, suppositions, fill in the blanks. These unions were not uncommon at that time. And like many of them in colonial Trinidad, you kind of just accept it. You might mamagai or gossip for a while, but people just moved on. So Granny grew up in the bush, far from the Scottish aristocrats that she was related in blood to, and much closer to her Indian side. She met my grandfather, who was an immigrant shopkeeper from China, and she fell in love. And when my father was born, who was number 3 of 7, the difficult decision was made to send him back to China to become acculturated, to meet a Chinese woman, to carry on the Chinese language and heritage back to the family in Trinidad. And that's kind of how it was done. The rest is history, as they say. When my mother moved to the household, it was kind of Clash of the Titans or Avengers or any Marvel superhero against the evil and the good. My mom was a hummingbird, but my grandmother was slow and methodical, quiet and steely, but yet loving and soft. She gave me a strong dose of Caribbean discipline, but with a lot of spoonfuls of brown sugar to go along with it. You might have seen this on the internet, this video on the internet. This is the kind of Caribbean woman that I grew up with.
Stop moving. Simply stop moving. If you do not have the type of bread you like in your house, eat crackers. If you do not have bread, eat cereal. Eat oats. Sardines. You're supposed to have a 2-week supply for hurricane. And at the beginning of this, I said, prepare your disaster kit as if you would for a hurricane.
So that's what I'm talking about. You see, these kind of women, I grew up surrounded by them. They were my teachers. They were my relatives. They were my aunts. They were my cousins. So let's get back to Granny now. So Granny's Sunday lunches were legendary. Macaroni pie, baked chicken, salad, lime juice with Angostura bitters, pepper sauce. She lit candles at night to invoke the Catholic Holy Spirit, yet at the same time, she warded off these Caribbean monsters that we all as kids and adults were afraid of. The duendes, the sucuñas, the things that people put obia on you for. Now I guess I had to add snakes to the list of things she warded off. So there were many parts of the story that I would never know about my grandmother or her mother before her, my Hindi-speaking great-grandmother. But what this taught me is that we have to fight the pressure to flatten someone into a one-dimensional caricature. My previously childlike one-dimensional view of my grandmother was changed completely the day I saw her shoot the snake off the balcony. This one truth wasn't something new, Everyone seemed to know about it. The other villagers all knew. Seeing the multi-textured complexity that was my grandmother was like looking at the northern range in Trinidad. And once you look at these mountains, they're strong and steely, but stare at them a little bit more, and you'd see how the light plays across the face of the mountain, and you see the mountain in a different way, and you see the trees. In life, we are shaped by our community identity. We are who we are known to be, after all. We are what our reputation is. But our reputation is constantly being revised. It's constantly being edited and recast as the many truths we bring to the table get revealed. And the longer you look at someone, the more you would see these truths. So the hate came like a tropical thunderstorm, sudden, with thunderclaps, lightning, and we were caught without warning. We had no umbrellas, we had no tall boots, we had no raincoats. And that rain, that storm was unrelenting. It was April 8th, 2020, and I was giving the first talk in one of the first national webinars that talked about disparities in COVID, and it was sponsored by the Association of Black Cardiologists. It was called At the Heart of the Matter, Unmasking the Invisibility of COVID-19 in Diverse Populations. And we were being Zoom bombed. Go blow yourselves up. No one care you. There was no way to stop this. This was the early Zoom days and security was just not that good. Our technical team was unable to eject the bombers, and we were caught in this ongoing onslaught of hate. I was in the middle of my talk, but I was seeing the chat light up in the corner of my eye. And this chat was going to all of the participants from the bombers. So we as the panelists were private chatting with each other. We were trying to strategize what to do. I was giving my talk still, and at the same time I was furiously typing like a madman on chat with the other panelists. I was certainly nervous about giving this talk because it was one of these talks about disparities, and we had only now started to talk about disparities in terms of COVID-19. But now my cortisol was off the charts. Should we stop the session by saying something? Should I say something? Would these folks know where I lived? Michelle Albert, UCSF faculty and the president of the Association of Black Cardiologists, took charge. She said, we should soldier on. She gave us pep talks. She told us she loved us, she cared for us, we are doing a great job. And she gave the final word, ultimately. These final 4 words: we will finish this. What happened next was first a trickle, then an outpour. The messages kept on coming. Thank you to all the panelists. We love you so much. Thank you for this wonderful webinar. Thank you to all the speakers. Soon these messages from the audience, hundreds and thousands of them, overwhelmed the haters. These messages gave affirmations of love, of gratitude, of respect, not only for the panelists, but for each other, for all of us. And in the end, Michelle closed with this quote from Maya Angelou that I would never forget. If you find it in your heart to care for somebody else, you would have succeeded. So my healing had started. When I went home, I tweeted about it. I started publicizing what had happened. And inspired by Michelle's quote, I delved more into the poetry for healing. And this poem caught my eye. It was written by Maya Angelou in 1995, and it's called Touched by an Angel. We, unaccustomed to courage, exiles from delight, live coiled in shells of loneliness until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. Love arrives, and in its stream come ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, ancient histories of pain. Yet if we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fear from our souls. We are weaned from our timidity in the flush of love's light. We dare be brave, and suddenly we see that love costs all we are and we will ever be, yet it is only love which sets us free. So now I'm quoting Maya Angelou and telling you a story about speaking at an event hosted by Black cardiologists. But I'm not American-born, I'm not Black, I'm not a cardiologist, and I certainly don't pretend to be a cardiologist. I couldn't name these fangle-dangle new anticoagulants even if my life depended on it. So what was I doing there? I guess it was something that Michelle saw in me. I first met Michelle as she was transitioning into her new role as the Associate Dean of Admissions at the UCSF School of Medicine. I had been on the committee and I was moving off, and she had stopped by to introduce herself to the group, pleasantries. I noticed that she was serious, she was professional, she was no nonsense from the start. And I felt this really strange familiarity with her, almost like I met her before, like she was my big sister or one of my cousins that I knew from back home. And then she opened her mouth. That unmistakable Caribbean lilt was hard to ignore. She immediately reminded me of these strong women that raised me. So I went back to the office and performed an intervention. The only intervention that I knew. I internet stalked her. And I found the answer on GuyaneseGirlsRock.com. Guyanese Girls Rock, right? She was a fellow spirit from the Caribbean, from Guyana to be precise, not from Trinidad. And Guyana was really similar to Trinidad. They were both British colonies. Guyana was on the South American continent, closest to Trinidad. We had, very similar culture, except we had much better food and music. And they have a higher waterfall, but it's kind of hard to get to anyway. So this was April 2020. The pandemic was raging on. Cases were going up. Deaths were skyrocketing. The darkness of COVID was enveloping the world. I was caught up in fear. We were all caught up in fear. I had clinical duties to deal with. I was teaching this new online format for the entire course. And yes, I had this new job as Associate Dean of Regional Campuses. Crazy, right? I had no idea how I did it all. For me, the days bled into nights in this continuum punctuated only by meals and sleep in random spurts. I only wore scrubs. Mentally, emotionally, physically, I felt spent. I felt exhausted. But I kept going on, thanks to people like Michelle, thanks to people who gave me that wind. So over the year, Michelle and I exchanged multiple texts about faith, about family, about politics, about care that we had to give for each other and to others around us. And texts about Indian matchmaking. We both didn't like that woman from Texas. We thought her mom was way too overbearing. I guess I always had a question. I wondered, what did you see in me to help me be involved in all of the ABC activities and in general, especially as a Trinidadian?
Well, of course, first and foremost, as a Trinidadian, I knew that being from Guyana, that I can trust you. I knew that you would be real, that you would tell the truth, and that you would get the job done. I mean, plain and simple. And this is all, folded into your immense expertise related to infectious disease and COVID. I love seeing you breaking it to the public about COVID and using, simple language and examples.
And second part of the question, who has the better food, Trinidad or Guyana?
Of course, Guyana. I cannot believe you're asking me that question, Peter. That's ridiculous.
And I bet you're going to mention pepper pot now, right?
Yes, of course. Our national dish, pepper pot, and metagy, followed by pepper pot, following pepper pot. Fantastic. Of course, we have better food than you do. Come on.
Michelle gave me the courage to push myself into territory that I would not have dared stepped on otherwise. She saw the fullness. She saw the potential in me as an ally and a spokesperson, as a trusted comrade in a COVID emergency. She put faith in me, invited me in, and pushed me into new roles. I was struggling in the high seas of the pandemic, but she was the wind that filled the sails for me to make headway again, for me to be renewed. So I started stepping into more public-facing roles, even challenging media like TV. And I used the fullness of my identity joyfully, yet delivered my message deliberately.
We do want to show something pretty cool. You guys celebrating your graduates. We're going to show that video and you can tell us about it.
Yeah.
Wow, are these faculty showing off their moves to congratulate the class of 2020?
Yeah, the faculty were mainly there for entertainment purposes, but the students were the main dancers. You notice they all wore a different uniform. They didn't tell us, but they were all in black to identify who the real dancers were. And the faculty were in like various other things, mainly for entertainment purposes. It was really done by the juniors.
That's you, right? Oh, you tossed your mask.
Yeah. I'm being a little bit sassy with my mask and that.
I gotcha. Now, I got to ask you, for folks who don't know your background, I sense a little island flavor here in this video.
So I'm from the Caribbean originally, and even though I'm from, of Asian descent, but they're Asians who moved to the Caribbean. So I feel a little bit different influence in growing up, if that's what Kirsten is saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I bet you cook the most creative, interesting cuisine in your household. You got to post some pictures on social for us one of these days. But thank you so much for the great information today. And yeah, congratulations to your graduates. I'm sure they're going to go out there and do great work on their own and keep us.
And contribute to the workforce we need right now, actually, in California.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was finding my voice, and I began to believe in myself, and to believe that I could do something in this pandemic. I became enraged by structural racism and the inequities that COVID really unearthed. I became enraged about tear gas and using tear gas against innocent civilians. I became enraged about San Quentin and how it seemed that no one was trying to do something to protect the volcano of COVID that was erupting there. I became mad about Asian hate speech and Asian-fueled violence against them. And the politics of COVID, who could not be mad about that? Disinfectants, masks, hydroxychloroquine. Come on. So I began speaking up, first timidly, then louder. I tweeted, I went on TV, I went on radio, I went on podcasts, both locally, nationally, and globally. I worked with public defenders to ban tear gas in Portland, Oregon. I helped sign and disseminated petitions against structural racism. I helped work on a declaration in the Von Stage case, which was upheld by the California Court of Appeals, speaking to an indifferent California Department of Corrections who delivered cruel and unusual punishment, which was prohibited and is prohibited by the 8th Amendment from our Constitution. I worked with disability rights around California Patton State Hospital, unearthing all of the unsafe practices they were doing there. And this resulted in immediate and rapid vaccination back in January, before it was widespread and available to all. But it would have been untruthful and be a lie to say that I've been so resilient and unscathed through all of this darkness. I have suffered too. So many of us have suffered. My friends and family have suffered because I've been inattentive to them. My mother hasn't seen me in more than a year, and that's taken a really high mental toll. My students have suffered. It's been hard for me to answer emails, not only because I've had so many emails, but because of this brain fog that I've had. And I thought to myself so many times during the months, should I put this newfound political awakening on hold to take care of my family, to take care of myself? But I thought every time, this will certainly end next month or the next 2 months. I kept on waiting for it to end, but it never seemed to end. There's always something new to take care of, some new initiative, some crazy injustice, some shocking misinformation from political leaders. Now, I was a hummingbird. I think it's important to acknowledge the toll and the suffering that all of us have had before we can move on. Who would have thought that a shy boy from Fifth Company Village, Moruga Road, would be thrust into that role? But now, whenever Trinidadians, Guyanese, Bajans, Jamaicans, Grenadians hear my Trini accent on the news, they would shoot me an email, message, or even figure out some way to text me, to encourage me, to give me affirmations, to tell me they were proud of me. I needed this win to push me. I needed Michelle. I needed these people around me to push me during COVID. But our work is far from over. The pandemic still rages on. There are a lot of inequities around the world in vaccinations. There are lots of current crimes against Asian Americans that have reached epidemic level. Structural racism hasn't gone anywhere. Hashtag hate is a virus. A last lecture. There you have it. One chance to leave stories, one chance to leave songs of my life behind. No one can tell you how to live your life, my beloved students. No one can give you that singular truth. We have our stories. I have my stories, you have your stories. Stories are the way humans say what life means. Stories are the way we cope with shortcomings. But stories are intimately personal, but they're also political. Maybe you didn't notice, but all the people I featured today in this lecture were women. And as I prepared for the lecture, I kept on thinking about that Chinese proverb that I brought up earlier. Women hold up half the sky. This proverb was used to encourage women to work outside home, to contribute to the economy. But one can look back on revolutionary China and see clearly that there were no safeguards to give women respite at home, and they ended up saddled with 2 full-time jobs. Sadly, this is not very different to many parts of the world today, and in many parts of academic medicine. False equality does not mean always that there's an improvement. In fact, a lot of times there's continued marginalization and oppression. The Caribbean women in the stories today taught me so much. Maybe you have people like them in your life. Maybe you are like them. My mom was a hummingbird holding up more than half the sky. She brought the bustle of Hong Kong to sleepy Fifth Company Village, Moruga Road. I only caught glimpses of her, and I'm still learning her complexity. My grandmother was a mountain, like the northern range of Trinidad and Tobago. Take time to look hard enough through that stiff upper lip and see the play of light, and you make out the trees and the way the light works on the relief of the mountains. We cast ourselves as big central characters in the movie that is life, but we need to take time to slow down, to see the complexity of others in our family, in our community. We need people like Michelle. We need people who are the wind that see potential in you when you don't know that it's there. And they gently push you outside your comfort zone because they know you can do it, and you do it. In the past year, working with media has shown me that media likes to flatten us into one-dimensional notes. All of us know about interminable Zoom sessions and how we suffered with complex personalities flattened on screens, videos off, muted. So it's important for all of us to appreciate the fullness of others so they can step into roles defined and into roles not yet defined, like I did during COVID. I have profound faith in all of you to be heroic in the face of what life throws at us. Listen to the songs your ancestors sing to you. Be mindful of the songs you sing to others. The music you heard today throughout my lecture is a political statement. Calypso may sound like a tropical vacation, but it has roots in revolution. It began with music of 17th century Africans enslaved in Trinidad and were the means of expressing daily struggles of living, criticizing racial and economic inequities, and a way to voice concerns for those living on the islands. Calypso is both a joy, but also a form of musical protest. And it reminds me to tell you that everything we do is a political statement, but it can be joyful too. I want you to be full in life, appreciate the fullness of others. You make deliberate choices, and do make those deliberate choices. They all add up, even though they may seem small at the time. Slow down your hummingbird enough to appreciate the fullness of you, and others will. Appreciate the fullness of others as well. The bottom line is I want you to live a joyful political life. Thank you. So I wanted to thank so many people during my time here at UCSF, my time before UCSF. First of all, I wanted to thank the storytelling and technical support, Liz Neely, Kyle Van Ocker, Jennifer Roscoe, Isaac Conway Stenzel. I want to thank other women at UCSF who I admire and who have been my wind: Catherine Lucy, Jane Kaler, Joanne Engel, Letty Magania, Alma Martinez, Pat O'Sullivan, Helen Lozier, Denise Davis, Diane Lau, and so many others. I wanted to give gratitude to my closest colleagues at UCSF, the other deans, John Davis, Lee Jones, Karen Hauer, Kathy Julian, Kevin Souza, and old friends from the past, Dave Woofsey, Dan Lowenstein, Dave Irby, Paul Wilberding, Tom Coates, Joe Guglielmo, Calvin Chow, Anna Chang, Brian Schwartz, and Sam Bronfield. I couldn't have done this year without you. And to the students, you guys rock. Thanks so much for being everything to me for these past few years, including the Trinidadian student community. You guys have really brought me smiles, and we had some good food together. To my family, both my core family, my mom, my brother Patrick, my sister Jean, and my nuclear family, Linda, Emma, Nicola, and ultimately to my mom, who gave me birth. Thank you. So the last thing is, before I forget, don't forget to dance like no one is watching. Take it away, students.
Thank you, Dr. Chin Hong, for that passionate and inspirational lecture. To our audience, thank you for joining us. If you have a favorite takeaway, quote, or screenshot from the lecture this evening, we encourage you to share it on the Alumni Association's UCSF Connect by April 11th. If you would like to briefly connect with Dr. Chin Hong, please join us for an informal meet and greet right now on Zoom. We have included the link to the Zoom below. Thank you, and have a good night.